Blackened Wish, Chapter 2, Extraction. Like a caged bird, Stella wished for nothing more than to be free. Her room felt like a cell inside the prison everyone called a castle. She was only let out on special occasions, and each time she always had an escort. There were precious few times when she was alone outside of her room, and most of them were due to her sneaking out at night. A princess should always be accompanied by an attendant, Hilda had said. The head maid took her duties very seriously, directing the rest of the royal staff, as well as adopting the role of the princess's caretaker. She almost never let Stella out of her sight, and when she did, she made sure someone else was keeping an eye on her. The girl could hardly use the bathroom without an attendant shadowing her. Frankly, it was suffocating. Her sense of autonomy was stifled to the point where she almost didn't feel human. She was the princess before she was a person, and that meant her royal duties took priority over her personal desires. Attending this party and that, sitting through etiquette classes, making an appearance in front of the public alongside the king and queen. She hated it. All of it. Though she had all manner of physical possessions and could ask for more whenever she wanted, none of it really mattered to her. It only reminded her of the one thing she desired but could never have: freedom. Her only form of respite was books. Stories of the outside world she'd never seen, the unknown horizons beyond the stone walls. One in particular resonated with her so well that she could picture herself in it. Every night she would read it out loud to herself before going to bed, in the vain hope that maybe one day it would become a reality. She knew that was a silly thought. There was no way a handsome prince would just appear out of thin air and whisk her away. Those kind of things don't just happen. That's why they're called fairy tales. That's what she told herself, but there was no denying that a boy matching the story was in her room right now. And just like in that story, he seemed to have popped in out of nowhere and offered to take her away. It was all too good to be true, and yet it was actually happening. Her head was swimming as she dug through her wardrobe. She threw clothes this way and that, paying no mind to the articles piling up on the floor around her. It seemed to take her forever to find an outfit that matched what Nathan had said. "Are you done yet?" She was too busy searching to answer him. Normally, one of the maids would wake her up and pick out what she would wear for the day, so the thought of choosing for herself got her even more excited. Annoyed, Nathan clicked his tongue. "I'll check outside and make sure it's clear." The door barely made a sound as he cracked it open and peeked through. Then silently, he disappeared. Stella stopped rummaging and looked up. The fact that Nathan had left the room spurred her into grabbing the next dress she saw and quickly slipping it on. Then she snatched up a hooded cloak and threw it over herself, jammed a pair of shoes onto her feet, and then sprinted for the door. "Took you long enough," he hissed, his voice barely a whisper. "Now come on, no time to waste. Stay close and keep quiet." Before she could respond, he dashed off down the hallway. She stumbled as she followed after him, but managed to keep her footing. "He's so fast!" She didn't have much time to admire his speed, however, before they abruptly came to a stop halfway down the stairs. Voices were coming from the lower levels, and they sounded frantic. "Damn, sounds like they already found him." Nathan gritted his teeth. "Things just got a lot more difficult for us." "Him? Who are you talking about?" Instead of answering, Nathan grabbed her wrist. "Don't let go of me, no matter what." Before she could object, he pulled her down the rest of the stairs. At the bottom, he pressed himself against the wall and yanked her out of view of the nearby hallway. The sudden jerk made her dizzy, and she had to lean against the wall to keep herself from falling over. "What is going on?" she breathed once the world stopped spinning. "We're gonna have to make a break for it. Can you run?" Sure, but why?" "We have 15 seconds, starting now." The instant he finished his sentence, he leaped out into the hallway, dragging Stella behind him. She could barely keep up with his speed, and nearly fell several times. A group of guards passed right by them, but didn't seem to notice them, and kept running down the hallway in the opposite direction. Just as her legs were starting to hurt, Nathan pulled her into a dark corner behind a large golden statue of the king. After glancing around to make sure no one saw them, he looked at her. You still okay? Stella managed a nod, though her breathing was labored.
Yeah, but the guards, why didn't they?
I can turn myself invisible. As long as you're holding on to me, you're invisible too. She stared at him, his words not quite clicking.
Invisible? How? I don't understand.
I'll explain later, but it only lasts 15 seconds, so we have to be fast. Stella had never heard of an ability that could make someone invisible. She'd read every book about gifts that she could get her hands on, but none of them mentioned anything like that. She couldn't exactly doubt him, though, not after experiencing it for herself. That must mean there's more gifts out there than she was aware of. The thought of that got her even more motivated to escape the castle. Tell me, are there any tunnels underneath the castle?
Tunnels?
Stella repeated the word, thinking.
I think so. Probably.
Probably? You mean you don't know?
Well, I don't get to walk around much, so... Oh wait, I heard something about a secret passage in Father's study. Maybe we could look there.
Nathan's expression paled. Not an option. Any others?
That's the only one I can think of. Why? What's wrong with it?
He just shook his head. We'll have to find another way. Stella wasn't sure why he was so against the idea of checking the study. It should be empty at this time of night, so it would be easy to search. It seemed like the obvious choice. As they made their way further down, with Nathan using his ability to keep them out of sight, the number of guards increased. They were on higher alert than usual, and there was a tense air about the castle that seemed to come out of nowhere.
What's going on? Did something happen?
Nathan hesitated for a second before answering. They're looking for you. Someone probably noticed you were gone. Was that really it? Something felt off about that. It couldn't have been more than about 15 minutes since they'd left her room. The guards could mobilize fast, but not that fast. More importantly, he continued, this could work to our advantage.
Huh? What do you mean?
Do you know how to open the main gate?
Sure, but what is that?
Then that's our ticket out. With a nod, he gripped her hand again and started running. Stella didn't understand the logic. If the guards were on high alert, wouldn't that make security around the gate tighter? But he seemed confident enough, so she decided she would trust him. Not like she had a choice either way, really. Eventually, they made their way outside. The only thing separating them from the main gate was the castle gardens. There were multiple large bushes they could use for cover, but past those was a sizable stretch of path with nothing to hide behind.
Nathan, are you sure about this?
A smile creased his face. I can turn us invisible, remember? We just have to be fast.
But the guards...
Leave them to me. You just focus on opening the gate. Stella fidgeted, unable to look at him. She'd watched the guards open the gate on the rare occasions she was able to leave the castle, so she knew how it worked. She'd never actually done it herself, though. The mechanism seemed heavy, and she was worried she might not be strong enough to operate it. She didn't have the chance to tell him that, though, before he took hold of her hand again and pulled her out from behind the bush. Though Nathan's ability made them invisible, it didn't mask the sound of their footsteps. The guards turned in their direction,
Who's there?
but weren't able to see them.
Show yourself.
They just kept sprinting, heading straight for the guardhouse that served as the castle gate. Their 15 seconds was almost up, and one last guard stood in their way. As they closed the distance, Nathan simultaneously let go of Stella and tackled him to the ground. He didn't even get a chance to scream as Nathan squeezed his neck. Stella found herself rooted to the spot as the guard struggled in vain, then momentarily went limp. Nathan hadn't hesitated in the slightest, and seemed to know exactly what to do to knock the guard out. It felt practiced, like it wasn't the first time he'd done it. Did he have some kind of background in fighting? That thought was both fascinating and scary. "Open the gate!" he hissed at her. "Right!" She hurried over to the winch that raised the castle portcullis and pulled on it with all her might. At first, it seemed as though she couldn't move it, but then the crank groaned and began to turn. Slowly, inch by inch, the gate started lifting. It'd barely gotten off the ground when she heard shouts behind her. The guards in the garden had noticed them and were running toward the gate. She strained her muscles against the winch, but wasn't able to crank any faster. At this rate, there wouldn't be enough room to slip underneath the gate before the guards reached them. Seeing this, Nathan hurried over and put his hands on top of hers. With both of their strength together, they were able to make the gate rise a little faster. But the guards were closing in quickly, and Stella worried that they weren't going to make it. Just when the guards were almost upon them, Nathan let go of the crank and grabbed Stella. He yanked her hood down, then wrapped one of his arms all the way around her. "Stay back or the princess dies!" Nathan's voice was nothing like she'd heard before. His tone was harsh, almost biting. There was a flash of metal in the corner of her vision. Then something cold pressed up against her neck. A chill went down her spine.
"Nathan?"
she squeaked. He didn't respond. All of a sudden, he no longer seemed like the prince that had appeared in front of her window. He changed into someone completely different. Someone terrifying. Every fiber in her body was screaming at her to get away from him. But she didn't dare struggle. One wrong move and her throat might get sliced open.
"Nathan, please!"
"I said stay back!" he growled at the guards, who were trying to inch their way forward. "I'm leaving, and she's going with me. Don't follow us, or you'll be sorry." Leaving the castle with this boy no longer seemed like a good option. She didn't care what kind of punishment Hilda had in mind for her sneaking out. It was preferable to this. She reached down for the arm that was wrapped around her and grabbed it, squeezing with all her might. She knew she didn't quite have the strength to crush his bones, but hopefully it would hurt. Or at least get him to loosen his grip so she could escape. "What are you doing? Stop it!" She ignored him. This was definitely working. He'd stopped moving backwards, and his body was trembling slightly. If she kept this up, she might have an opening to break free. Her fingers felt hot as she pushed them harder and harder against his skin. Moments later, the pressure off her neck disappeared, followed by a metallic clang at her feet. The arm that had been holding her went limp, and she wrenched herself free. After taking shelter behind the guards, she looked back. There was a black knife lying on the ground next to Nathan. His expression was pale, and he seemed half-conscious, like he could collapse at any moment.
"What did you do to me?"
The guards closed in on him, their weapons raised. He weakly reached out toward her, but she just huffed and turned away. This boy wasn't the prince from her beloved fairy tale that would take her to see the world. He was a fraud. Nothing more than an intruder who had just tried to kidnap her. Someone like that deserves to be punished for his actions. He called out to her again, but she pretended not to hear it, and started walking back to the castle. It'd been fun, but that was all over now. There was no reason to stick around any longer. How did he get in anyway? Now that the excitement had died down, questions began popping into her head. Not only did he make it inside the castle, but he also got into her room without her or anyone else noticing. And then he took her all the way down to the gate before getting caught. The fact that it took that long to notice an intruder was appalling. What were the guards even doing? Something compelled her to stop and look back. The guards had surrounded him and confiscated his knife. He seemed to not have the energy to fight back, and simply let himself be restrained. It was almost pitiful to watch. But she couldn't allow herself to feel bad for him. It didn't matter that their little escapade was the most excitement she'd had in recent memory, or how the risk of getting caught made it that much more thrilling, and she definitely wasn't curious about his gift. His ability to turn himself and anyone he touched invisible wasn't interesting in the slightest. Also, the fact that he was handsome and cool, just like the prince she'd always dreamed of, didn't make him irresistibly attractive. And she absolutely didn't feel sad that she'd likely never see him again.